It's strange how a kitchen can remember. The smell of cinnamon from holidays long gone, the faint scratch on the counter where my late husband used to chop vegetables too hard, even the way the morning light hits the old teapot. It's all memory. And for me, that kitchen held 30 years of love, laughter, and recipes written on paper now too faded to read. Until one day, that laughter stopped feeling warm. My name is Margaret, and for as long as I can remember, I've believed that food was how you showed love. When my son, Evan, was a boy, I cooked to keep us close. After my husband passed, those dinners became our way of staying connected. It didn't matter if life got hard. Evan would come over every Sunday, sit at the same table and say, "Mom, no one makes roast chicken like you." He always said it with that grin that made my heart melt. But people change. Sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. And when Evan got married, I didn't realize that one day that same table would become a battlefield. Her name was Sophie. Pretty, polished, the kind of woman who never had a hair out of place. She worked in marketing, always dressed perfectly, and had that confident tone that could make even simple words sound like orders. From the moment I met her, I tried. I really did. I told myself she's just nervous. She'll warm up. But she never did. The first time they came over for dinner, I spent all afternoon cooking. Pot roast, garlic mashed potatoes, homemade bread, the kind of meal that takes patience, not speed. When I placed the dishes on the table, Evan smiled the way he used to. Sophie didn't. She poked at the food like it was something foreign. Then she gave a little laugh, soft but sharp enough to cut through the whole room. "Oh, this looks traditional," she said. The word traditional hung in the air like an insult. Evan tried to save the moment. "She means it looks amazing, Mom." But Sophie just smiled that smile that wasn't really a smile at all and said, "No, I mean it's cute. Like old-fashioned cooking." I laughed politely, pretended not to feel the sting. But deep down, something small cracked. Over the next few months, Sunday dinners became tense. Sophie would find something to comment on every time. Too salty. Too sweet. Too homey. She'd say things like, "You should try plating smaller portions. It's more elegant." Or, "I saw this cooking video online, they say butter is outdated." Outdated. That word again. I started to wonder if that's how she saw me too. Evan didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't want to. He'd just sit there, pretending everything was fine, caught between the woman who raised him and the woman he chose to love. It wasn't his fault. Love blinds you. But I saw the truth every time Sophie's eyes met mine. The silent message. You don't belong in his life anymore. Then one Sunday, everything changed. It was Sophie's idea to have dinner at their house. She said it was time to switch things up. I agreed, maybe foolishly, thinking it would be nice to take a break from cooking. When I arrived, the table was perfectly set. Candles, imported plates, small portions on large dishes. Everything looked like a photo from a magazine, cold, perfect, lifeless. Sophie greeted me with her usual smile. "Hi, Margaret. Hope you like vegan cuisine." Vegan. I had never been a picky eater, but I could already feel the distance between us widening. I nodded. "Oh, I'm sure it'll be wonderful." But what came next wasn't just food. It was a performance. Throughout the dinner, Sophie made little comments. "Oh, Evan says he used to eat so much butter when he lived with you. No wonder he had high cholesterol." Or, "I prefer fresh herbs. Dried ones are outdated, right?" Evan chuckled nervously, sipping his wine, and I stayed quiet. Every jab landed softly but precisely, like she had been practicing. And then came dessert. A small, perfectly decorated slice of cake. Sophie leaned forward and said with a laugh, "I made this myself. You know, Margaret, cooking isn't that hard once you modernize your thinking." That was it. The moment my patience ended. I smiled softly. The kind of smile that hides 1,000 memories. Every dinner, every night I stayed up late to make sure Evan ate after school, every time I scraped together ingredients when money was tight. Sophie didn't know that kind of cooking. She only knew recipes that fit inside phone screens. So I said, "You're right, dear. Maybe one day you can teach me." She laughed, satisfied, not realizing that I already had a plan forming quietly in the back of my mind. A plan that wouldn't involve shouting or anger, just a lesson. One she'd never forget. 'Cause sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't loud or cruel. Served slowly with a smile. And if you do it right, they never even see it coming. The night after that dinner at Sophie's house, I couldn't sleep. Not because of what she said, I'd endured worse words in life, but because of how she said them. That laugh. That polished tone that dripped with superiority. The kind of voice that says, "You're beneath me," without ever using the words. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking of every meal I'd cooked for people who mattered. Food wasn't just food to me, it was how I loved. When I baked, I remembered birthdays. When I roasted, I remembered holidays. Cooking was my language. And she had mocked it. Mocked me. But revenge isn't something you rush. Not real revenge. The best kind is patient, it simmers. Like a stew that needs time to soak in every flavor before it's ready to be served. For days, I kept up appearances. When Evan called, I spoke gently, asked how work was, how Sophie was settling in. I could hear it in his voice. He was torn. He loved her, but he missed the simplicity of home. He missed meals that didn't come out of cookbooks with French titles. That's when the idea came to me. A way to remind him and to teach her that some things can't be replaced. You can't modernize warmth. You can't upgrade love. And no matter how new the recipe, the taste of sincerity never changes. The following week, I invited them both over for dinner. Sophie hesitated, of course. "Oh, that's sweet, Margaret, but maybe we should order something instead. I don't want you to overexert yourself." Her voice was syrupy, fake concern laced with insult. I smiled into the phone. "Oh, don't worry, dear. I'll keep it simple." When Sunday came, I spent the entire morning preparing. Not to impress her, not anymore, but to prepare something meaningful. I took out my oldest pan, the one that had seen decades of meals. The wooden spoon with the crack my husband had glued years ago. And the spice jar with the fading label that read, "Family." I smiled. I knew what I was going to make. The dish was simple, really. A traditional stew, the same one my mother taught me when I was a girl. Rich broth, tender meat, slow-cooked vegetables. Kind of meal that fills a room long before it touches a plate. But there was something else. Something Sophie wouldn't expect. While the stew simmered, I set the table with care. Nothing fancy. Just my old floral plates and the same tablecloth Evan grew up seeing every Sunday. The house smelled like memories. Warm, alive, real. When the doorbell rang, I wiped my hands on my apron and took a deep breath. Evan entered first, smiling awkwardly. Behind him, Sophie followed, holding a small bottle of white wine. She looked around like she was walking into a museum. "Wow," she said, glancing at the decor. "Very vintage." I laughed softly. "Yes. Everything here has a story. Even the cracks." She didn't reply. As they sat, Evan looked genuinely happy. "Smells incredible, Mom." "What is it?" I smiled. "Just something special. I wanted to make it the way I used to." When I served the stew, I could see it, that faint flicker in Sophie's eyes. She didn't recognize the smell. It wasn't something trendy or modern. It was honest. And that made her uneasy. She lifted her spoon and took a small bite. Her smile froze. "This is interesting." Evan frowned. "What do you mean?" "It's delicious." "No, I mean it's strong. Like old-fashioned flavor. Maybe too heavy." She forced a polite laugh, but her face tightened. People don't cook like this anymore. I looked at her. No, they don't. That's why people don't feel like family anymore. She blinked. For the first time, she didn't have a ready comeback. Evan glanced between us, sensing the undercurrent but not understanding it. We ate mostly in silence. Every spoonful of stew felt like a memory pouring back into me, every holiday, every late-night meal after Evan's baseball games. I had fed him through childhood, heartbreak, even his college years when he was broke and tired. And now here he was, sitting beside a woman who treated those memories like antiques, things to be replaced, not cherished. After dessert, a simple apple pie, I watched as Sophie pushed her plate away. Her perfect lipstick left a faint mark on the fork. "Thanks, Margaret," she said. It was filling. There was that pause again. That careful choice of words. She stood up, glancing at Evan. "Shall we go? I promised my friend I'd video call her tonight." I nodded, keeping my smile. "Of course. Thank you both for coming." At the door, she hugged me, briefly, distantly, and whispered, "Next time, maybe we can cook something together. I'll show you some new recipes." Her tone was sugar, but her eyes were salt. When they left, I stood alone in the quiet kitchen. The smell of stew still lingered. Warm, comforting, but now mixed with something else, resolve. I walked to the counter and picked up the empty bowl Sophie had eaten from. I stared at it, thinking of her forced smile, her subtle jabs, her ignorance of what that meal meant. And then, softly, I said to the empty room, "You'll learn one day, dear. Some things can't be swallowed so easily." I washed the bowl, dried it carefully, and set it aside. Plan was only just beginning. Because the dish I truly wanted to serve her, the one she'd never be able to swallow, wasn't made of food. It was made of truth. The morning after that dinner, I stood by my kitchen window, watching the sunlight crawl across the frost on the glass. The house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort but reminds you how small you've become in someone else's world. I thought about Sophie's words. People don't cook like this anymore. It echoed in my head like a whisper that refused to fade. It wasn't just about food. It was about everything I stood for, every value, every tradition, every quiet act of love that had built this family. And she had dismissed it with a smirk. But what she didn't realize was that beneath every quiet woman who smiles through insults, there's a storm waiting to rise. And when it does, it doesn't scream. It simply changes everything. That morning, I brewed my coffee and opened my recipe book, the old one with stains on every page and notes written in my late husband's handwriting. Between the yellowed sheets was a folded letter Evan had written me years ago on my birthday. "Thank you for teaching me that love is shown, not said." I traced the words with my finger and smiled sadly. My son had known that once. But Sophie, she'd taken that truth from him. She had turned his warmth into politeness, his laughter into careful silence. I didn't blame her entirely. Charm can be a kind of poison, it tastes sweet at first. But Evan wasn't blind. Not completely. He was just lost in the fog of her control. That's when I decided something. If Sophie wanted to mock what I cooked, I'd cook something that wasn't for her taste buds, but for her conscience. A dish she couldn't swallow because it wasn't made of flavor. It was made of truth. A few days later, I went to visit Evan unannounced. It wasn't something I usually did, but I needed to see something for myself. Their house was beautiful, sterile, perfect, like a magazine ad. Everything gleamed, everything matched, and yet it all felt cold. When Evan opened the door, surprise flickered across his face. "Mom!" "You should have called." "I didn't want to intrude," I said softly. "Just thought I'd drop off some leftovers." Sophie appeared behind him, immaculate as always, her hair tied back, a small diamond glinting on her hand. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Margaret, that's so sweet. But you didn't have to. We've just had lunch." I held up the small casserole dish. "Just thought you might like a taste of something warm for later." She hesitated before taking it. Sure. Thank you. The way she said thank you sounded like an apology she didn't mean. Evan offered me coffee and I accepted. As I sat in their spotless kitchen, I noticed something. There were no smells. No trace of life, no warmth, no hint of anything that said home. Just polished surfaces and scented candles trying to pretend they belonged. Sophie talked endlessly about her work, campaigns, meetings, plans for their future. Evan nodded, half listening. He looked tired. When Sophie excused herself to take a call, I turned to him. Are you happy, Evan? He looked at me, startled. What kind of question is that? I mean it. Truly happy. He hesitated, then sighed. I love her, Mom. She's ambitious, you know? She pushes me. Makes me better. I nodded slowly. Yes. But sometimes the people who push us also pull us away from who we are. He didn't answer. Just looked down at his coffee, swirling it absent-mindedly. I smiled gently and reached across the table, touching his hand. You used to cook with me every Sunday. Remember? He chuckled faintly. Yeah. I burn the garlic bread every time. I laughed. You did. But at least you tried. There was a flicker of nostalgia in his eyes, brief, fragile. I knew then that the boy I'd raised was still in there somewhere. When Sophie returned, she looked at the two of us and gave a small, tight smile. What are we talking about? Garlic bread, Evan said with a half smile. Oh, she replied, brushing imaginary lint off her blouse. Carbs. The word dropped like a stone. I left soon after, but as I walked out the door, I saw the casserole still sitting untouched on the counter. Sophie hadn't even bothered to put it in the fridge. And that's when I noticed something else. On the counter beside it sat an envelope. A printed invitation, half open with elegant gold lettering. It read, Gala dinner, hosted by Sophie and Evan Carter. I froze. Evan's name came second. It used to come first. Sophie saw me glance at it. Oh, she said casually, just a small business event I'm organizing. It's kind of a big deal. Lots of people from my company are attending. That sounds wonderful, I said softly. Will you be cooking for them? She laughed. Cooking? No. Tatered. I'd never trust my reputation to homemade food. That was it. That was the line that sealed it. I smiled politely, said goodbye, and walked to my car. But inside, something shifted. Plan until now had been vague, an idea simmering quietly. Now it had shape, form, purpose. If Sophie wanted an audience, she would get one. If she wanted to mock the kind of woman who loved through food, then she'd learn, before everyone she admired, that some flavors can't be digested. And the dish I'd serve her wouldn't come from a kitchen. It would come from the truth she'd buried under her perfect smile. That night, I took out my recipe book again and placed a new page inside. At the top, I wrote in careful, steady letters, For Sophie. And below it, the first line, ingredients, patience, timing, and the one secret she thought I'd never find. 'Cause by then, I already knew her secret. And I was going to serve it to her, slowly, beautifully, and in front of everyone who thought she was perfect. The first time I realized Sophie was hiding something, it wasn't through gossip or rumor. It was through silence. Silence always says more than words, especially the kind that follows a lie. After that visit, I couldn't stop thinking about the invitation, hosted by Sophie and Evan Carter. It wasn't just an event. It was a declaration of control. Evan's name came second because in Sophie's world, everything had to orbit her. But what Sophie didn't know was that I had spent my whole life learning to listen between the words people said. You can tell a lot about a person by what they choose not to say. And Sophie's silences were deafening. A week later, I called Evan just to check in. He sounded distracted. Oh, hey, Mom. Can I call you back? Sophie's working on the gala plans and she's stressed. I laughed softly. I'm sure she is. Just remember to eat something, okay? Yeah, he said absent-mindedly. She'll probably just order something. That told me enough. They didn't share meals anymore, just schedules. That night, I decided to take a walk. It had rained earlier and the streets were wet, the world reflecting in puddles. I passed the small market where I used to buy ingredients for Evan's favorite stew. The old grocer, Mr. Patel, smiled as I walked in. Ah, Mrs. Carter. Long time. How is your son? I smiled faintly. He's doing well. Married now. Ah, yes. I heard. Very beautiful woman. I nodded. Yes. Very. Then, as I turned to leave, he added something that made me stop. She comes here sometimes, you know. Buys flowers. Always the same ones, white lilies. I froze. White lilies. Evan hated lilies. They reminded him of funerals. He'd told me that once after his father's passing. So why would Sophie buy them? I thanked Mr. Patel and walked home, my mind quietly turning. That night I went online. I didn't have much experience with technology. My search history was mostly recipes and gardening tips, but I knew how to find a name. And Sophie's name appeared everywhere. Photos from company events, social media posts, articles about her marketing campaigns. But one thing caught my attention, a comment beneath a photo from an event 2 months ago. It was from a man named Daniel. He'd written, "Always stunning, sophomore. You light up every room." There was nothing overtly inappropriate about it, just too familiar. Too personal. I clicked his profile. He worked at the same company. And in nearly every photo Sophie had posted in the past 6 months, he was there, always standing a little too close, always looking at her, never at the camera. I sat there for a long time, staring at that screen. Then I closed the laptop quietly. It wasn't my place to interfere. Not yet. But sometimes life hands you the very ingredients you need, you just have to know when to use them. The following week, Sophie called me. Her tone was unusually cheerful. Margaret, I wanted to ask, would you be free to help with the gala? We're short-staffed for some of the catering logistics, and Evan said you're so organized. I almost laughed out loud. So organized. She wanted me near her, but not close enough to matter, just useful enough to serve her image. Yes, dear, I said softly. I'd love to help. Wonderful. It'll be formal, elegant. Black tie. You'll love it. I smiled into the receiver. I'm sure I will. When I hung up, I looked around my kitchen, my old, humble kitchen, and felt a quiet calm. If Sophie wanted to play hostess, then I would be the perfect guest. And I already knew what I was going to bring. The days leading up to the event were busy. Sophie sent me lists of small tasks, trivial things really. Confirming vendors, adjusting the seating chart, collecting feedback from caterers. I did everything perfectly. Smiled during every phone call. Thanked every vendor. I even offered to pick up a few decorations myself. Sophie was delighted. Oh, Margaret, you're such a lifesaver. Her praise rolled off me like rain on glass. Because while she saw me as her polite, harmless mother-in-law, I was watching, listening, waiting. And every detail I gathered about that night, the guest list, the speeches, even the catering, was another step toward what I was preparing. The night before the gala, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the kitchen table, the same one where Evan had once done his homework, where I had spent decades kneading dough and teaching him that kindness was the best recipe in life. And I realized something. Revenge wasn't really about making someone suffer. It was about revealing what they truly are. And letting the world see it for themselves. Sophie had built her life on presentation. Everything about her was polished, curated, rehearsed. So if she wanted to mock my cooking, to dismiss what was real, I would show her what fake really looked like. not through anger, but through exposure. I looked again at the invitations sitting on the counter. Gala dinner, hosted by Sophie and Evan Carter. A perfect setting for a perfect reveal. And by the end of that night, she wouldn't just be tasting something bitter, she'd be choking on the truth she'd tried so hard to hide. I smiled softly, closed my eyes, and whispered to the empty kitchen, "It's almost ready." The day of the gala began with a kind of stillness that didn't feel natural, like the calm before a storm. The winter light was cold and silver, the kind that seeps into every corner but never warms anything. I woke up early, brewed my coffee, and sat at the kitchen table for a long time without drinking it. It wasn't nerves. It was focus. 'Cause that night wasn't about anger. It was about balance. When someone mocks your love, your care, your years, it doesn't just wound you, it tilts the scales of something sacred. And the only way to fix it is to restore what's been taken. That was what tonight was for. Around noon, I ironed my black dress, the same one I'd worn to Evan's graduation years ago. It wasn't new or fashionable, but it had meaning. That was what Sophie could never understand. Meaning doesn't wrinkle with time. When I arrived at the event hall that evening, the place looked like something out of a magazine. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, gold cutlery. Everything gleamed. Sophie's world, perfectly arranged, perfectly soulless. She was everywhere at once, directing waiters, checking the floral arrangements, laughing with guests before the doors had even opened. When she saw me, she smiled like a hostess greeting an uninvited guest. "Margaret, you made it. How do I look?" I studied her for a second, her sleek black gown, her flawless hair, the perfect shine on her lipstick. "You look exactly the way you wanted to," I said. She took it as a compliment. Course she did. Evan arrived moments later, looking handsome but tired, a suit that didn't quite fit right because it wasn't really him. He hugged me quickly. "I'm glad you came, Mom. I wouldn't miss it for the world." The room filled quickly. Music played softly, and laughter floated through the air like bubbles that would eventually pop. While everyone mingled, I stayed near the catering tables, making sure everything was in place. The head caterer, a kind woman named Laura, smiled at me. "You must be Sophie's mother-in-law," she said. "Yes. You've done a beautiful job." "Oh, thank you." "She's particular." I laughed quietly. That's one word for it. As Laura walked away, I caught sight of something across the room. A man. Tall, well-dressed. Talking to Sophie in that too familiar way, leaning just a little too close. Daniel. He looked exactly like his photos online, confident, charming, unaware that his smile had already written half the story I was about to tell. I didn't look away. I didn't need to. I had no intention of confronting her. That wasn't the kind of woman I was. Instead, I turned to the table beside me, where name cards were neatly arranged for each guest. And there, in the center, sat the printed program for the evening. Gala dinner, hosted by Sophie and Evan Carter. Below it, special acknowledgments by Sophie Carter. Perfect. The event began. Guests took their seats. Evan stood at the microphone first, welcoming everyone. His speech was short, polite, empty of warmth but full of the right words. Then he introduced Sophie. She stepped forward with a gleaming smile, every eye on her. "Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. This event means so much to me, to us." Her manicured hand brushed Evan's arm briefly before she turned back to the crowd. She spoke about success, ambition, teamwork. Everything she thought sounded impressive. When the applause came, it was polite but hollow. Then came dinner. The waiters moved gracefully, setting down plates of imported delicacies, perfectly plated, meticulously arranged, and entirely tasteless to me. I waited until Sophie's laughter echoed from a nearby table, then approached Laura, the caterer, quietly. "Would you mind adding something to the dessert table?" I asked, showing her a small covered tray I'd brought from home. She looked at me curiously. "Oh, is it prepped?" "Yes. Just one dish. It's for a personal gesture. You can place it near the front. She smiled. Of course. I watched as she set it down. A single dish, simple and unassuming among the luxury around it. A small porcelain bowl with a silver spoon, covered gently with a cloth napkin. No one paid attention to it then. But soon everyone would. When dessert was announced, guests drifted toward the table, chatting and laughing. Sophie joined them, her laughter sharp enough to slice through the chatter. I stood by the side, silent, invisible, watching. Then she saw it. The small porcelain bowl. She frowned, pulling the napkin aside. Inside was a single dish, something she didn't recognize. "What's this?" she asked, half to herself. "It's from me," I said softly. Everyone nearby turned. Her expression flickered between curiosity and caution. "Oh, it's called memory stew. A family recipe. Thought you might like to try something truly traditional." The guests smiled politely, assuming it was a light-hearted moment. Sophie, ever the performer, laughed. "How sweet. Maybe I'll try it." She lifted a spoonful and brought it to her lips. Then she froze. Her smile faltered, not because of the taste, but because of what she saw under the bowl. As she set the spoon down, her eyes widened. Beneath the bowl, tucked carefully under the linen, was a folded piece of paper. One she recognized. Her laughter stopped entirely. "Something wrong, dear?" I asked. She said nothing. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the note. The guests around her had grown quiet, sensing tension but not understanding it. I looked at her calmly. "Go on. Read it." Her eyes darted from me to Evan, who now looked confused. Then, slowly, she unfolded the paper. There, printed clearly, was a photograph. Sophie and Daniel. Not from a business event this time, but from a weekend trip. Timestamp, the message, the unmistakable intimacy in their posture. Gasps rippled through the small circle of onlookers. Evan's face went pale. He reached for the photo, but Sophie clutched it in her trembling hand, eyes darting like a trapped animal. This isn't what it looks like," she stammered. But it was. And everyone knew it. I stood still, my voice calm. "It's an old recipe, dear. Kind where the truth is the main ingredient. It always leaves a bitter aftertaste." The silence that followed was the kind that could break glass. Evan looked at me, his eyes full of shock, confusion, pain. "Mom, how did you?" "I didn't need to," I said quietly. "Truth has a way of cooking itself, Evan." The music had stopped. Guests whispered behind their napkins. Sophie stood there, shaking, unable to speak. And in that moment, I didn't feel victory. Just release. Because revenge wasn't meant to destroy her, it was meant to remind her that some things once served can never be taken back. Silence has its own weight. Presses down on a room until even breathing feels like a disturbance. That was what the gala became, a space heavy with shame, confusion, and realization. No one moved for several seconds after Sophie dropped the spoon. The sound of it hitting the floor was soft, but it echoed louder than the music ever had. Evan's eyes were fixed on the photograph in her shaking hand. For a moment, he didn't even blink. He just stood there, trying to stitch together a version of reality that made sense, one where the woman he loved wasn't the woman in that picture. Sophie's lips trembled. "Evan, it's not, he's just a colleague. That picture, it was edited, I swear." But the fear in her voice was raw, unpolished. The kind of fear that doesn't lie well. Evan didn't answer. He just took the photo gently from her fingers. Everyone's gaze followed his movement, the soft crackle of paper, the slow, deliberate way he looked down at it. I watched him quietly, the same way I had watched him take his first steps, ride his first bike, drive his first car. Except now, he wasn't learning balance, he was losing it. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm but hollow. "When was this taken?" Sophie's eyes darted around. It's an old picture. It's nothing. Where? Evan, please. This isn't the time. No, he said sharply. This is exactly the time. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Some pretended to check their phones. Others watched like it was a scene in a play they couldn't stop. I stayed still. Not a word. Not a smile. This wasn't my moment anymore. This was his. Sophie stepped closer, reaching for his hand. Evan, please, let's talk about this later. He pulled away. When my mother found out, what did you do? Her breath caught. What are you talking about? You knew she'd seen this, didn't you? She froze. The truth sometimes doesn't come out in words, it comes out in hesitation. That half-second pause when the brain tries to lie faster than the heart can beat. Evan exhaled slowly. How long? Her silence was answer enough. He turned, looking at the guests, at the ruined perfection around him, the gold cutlery, the expensive wine, the forced smiles now fading. Then he looked at me. Did you know before tonight? I met his eyes. Yes. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because some lessons, I said softly, aren't understood until they're tasted. He nodded once, slowly. And for the first time in years, I saw something familiar in him again, clarity. Sophie's face crumbled. Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't sorrow, they were fear. Fear of losing the only thing she couldn't replace, control. She turned toward me. How could you do this to me? Her voice cracked, sharp and thin. I opened my home to you, I tried to include you, and this is how you repay me? I looked at her gently, almost pitying her. You didn't open your home, Sophie. You built walls and called them windows. You mocked everything that made this family warm. I didn't do this to you. You did it to yourself. She stared at me, wide-eyed, searching for anger in my face. But there was none. Only quiet truth. I didn't come here to humiliate you, I continued. I came here to remind you that love, real love, can't live inside lies. Not with him. Not with anyone. Sophie stepped back, trembling, her perfect composure shattered. The mask she'd worn for so long had finally cracked. And there, in front of everyone she'd tried to impress, she was no longer the glamorous hostess. She was just a scared woman surrounded by the consequences of her own choices. The rest of the night unraveled quickly. Guests whispered apologies, offered polite goodbyes, and slipped out into the cold. The chandeliers dimmed as the staff began cleaning up, pretending not to notice the tension left behind. Evan stood near the stage, his hands on the back of a chair, his head bowed. Sophie tried one last time to reach him. Evan, please, we can fix this. I made a mistake, but... He looked up, eyes tired. Mistakes are burned edges, Sophie. You scrape them off and start over. This isn't that. She flinched, her lip trembling. So that's it. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. When she finally walked out, her heels clicking across the marble floor, the sound echoed like punctuation, the end of a sentence that had taken too long to finish. After the hall emptied, Evan and I were the last ones there. He sat down heavily, rubbing his temples. I don't even know what to say. Then don't, I whispered. Just breathe. He did. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Quiet felt different now, not heavy but cleansing. Finally, he looked at me. How did you find out? Her silence told me. And her arrogance confirmed it. He nodded slowly, staring at the folded photograph on the table. Then he said something I'll never forget. I should have listened to you. I smiled softly. No, Evan. You just needed to see for yourself. Some lessons don't fit into words, they need a moment. Tonight was that moment. He exhaled, the sound somewhere between relief and grief. What are you going to do now? Go home, I said. Wash my dishes. Sleep. He almost laughed. That's simple. Yes, I said. That's simple. Because I've already served my last meal. As we left the hall, I looked back one last time at the tables, the lights, the remnants of Sophie's perfect world. It all looked so fragile now, like glass that had finally realized it could break. And in that moment, I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt done. 'Cause revenge isn't always loud or cruel. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just truth, served cold under bright lights for everyone to see. It had been 3 weeks since the gala, and for the first time in a long while the house felt like a home again. Quiet, yes, but peaceful. The kind of quiet that doesn't ache. Sighed, the last of winter was beginning to loosen its grip. The air smelled faintly of thawing earth and rain. I sat by the kitchen window, sipping tea, watching a pair of sparrows hop along the fence. They always came back this time of year, building nests in the same crooked corner of the roof. Life moves on even when you think it shouldn't. Even when the noise of pain still echoes in your bones. Since that night, Evan had come by almost every day. Sometimes to talk. Sometimes to say nothing. Mostly, he just wanted to sit in the kitchen and breathe somewhere that didn't feel like a lie. First time he visited, he looked 10 years older. He didn't say much. Just sat there, staring at his hands. Finally, he said, "I still can't believe she did that." I didn't answer right away. 'Cause what could I say? That love makes fools of us all? That sometimes we mistake confidence for sincerity, charm for care? Instead, I poured him a cup of tea and said, "You believed in her because you wanted to. That isn't a sin, Evan. That's love." He looked up at me, eyes tired but softer than before. "Were you angry with me?" "No," I said quietly. "I was heartbroken." "There's a difference." He nodded, staring into his cup. "I should have seen it." "No," I said. "You should have been allowed to see the best in someone without being punished for it." That's what hurt most, I think. The way good people start doubting their goodness after someone else betrays it. As days passed, Evan began to look more like himself again. He laughed more, though sometimes it was still fragile, like glass that hadn't fully cooled after breaking. He told me he'd filed for separation, that Sophie had moved out of their apartment. "I don't even know where she went," he said one afternoon, almost to himself. I looked at him, not with pity, but with the kind of understanding only mothers have. "She'll go wherever she can pretend she's still someone worth clapping for." He sighed. "You think she'll ever change?" "No," I said simply. "People like her don't change. They just move to new audiences." He smiled sadly. "Maybe you're right." Then, after a pause, "You really didn't want to humiliate her that night, did you?" I shook my head. "I wanted her to taste honesty. It's bitter, but it cleanses." That evening, after he left, I sat at the same table and pulled out my recipe book. Between the pages was the sheet I'd added weeks ago, the one that read for Sophie. The ink had faded slightly at the edges. I took a deep breath and added one more line beneath it. Final step, let go. Because revenge, when it's done right, doesn't linger. Burns away the poison, then leaves you room to heal. A few days later, I received a letter. Handwritten. The return address had no name. Just an unfamiliar street. Inside was a single folded page. The handwriting was elegant but shaky. "Margaret, I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't have excuses. I wanted to say that I understand now what you were trying to teach me. That night, I thought you wanted to destroy me. But I've replayed your words over and over, and I realized you only showed me what I had already done to myself. I don't know who I am anymore. But maybe that's the beginning. Sophie." I sat there a long time after reading it. Then, without even meaning to, I whispered, "Good." Not out of cruelty. Out of closure. 'Cause sometimes the only way to rebuild a person is to let them fall apart. The following Sunday, I cooked again. Not for anyone else. Just for me. A simple stew, rich and slow, filling the kitchen with warmth. The kind of smell that makes you remember who you are. I set 2 plates out of habit, one for me, one for Evan in case he came by. But even if he didn't, I knew he would come eventually. He always did. As I stirred the pot, I looked around the kitchen. The same cracked counter. The same window smudged with old fingerprints. Everything exactly as it should be. People talk about revenge like it's about hurting someone else. But that's not true. Real revenge is when you take back what they tried to steal, your peace, your dignity, your worth. You take it back quietly. Completely. And that's what I had done. The phone rang just as I was turning off the stove. It was Evan. Mom. Yes. Do you mind if I come over? I miss your cooking. I smiled. There's always a seat for you, sweetheart. When he arrived, I served him a bowl of stew, the same one he'd grown up with. He took a bite, closed his eyes, and exhaled. God, I miss this. I laughed softly. It's nothing special. He shook his head. No, Mom. It's everything. And for the first time in a long while, I felt whole. Through dinner, when he left, I washed the dishes slowly, one by one. The house was quiet again, but this time it was full of peace instead of waiting. And when I wiped my hands on the towel, I looked toward the old recipe book resting on the counter and whispered, "Lesson served." It was late March when the letter came, 3 months after the gala, 2 months after Sophie disappeared from town. Life had settled into a fragile rhythm again. I'd stopped waking up in the middle of the night expecting phone calls. I'd stopped glancing at the empty chair across the table. Evan had started to heal too. He'd found a small apartment not far from my house and was slowly rebuilding. He looked healthier. The gray beneath his eyes had faded. Sometimes he even smiled without forcing it. But the letter, it changed something. Came in a plain brown envelope, no return address. Inside was a photograph, old, worn, water-stained at the edges. It showed Sophie sitting by a fire pit in the desert, her face turned away, her hair tangled in the wind. There was no note. Only one line written on the back of the photo in shaky handwriting. I'm learning what hunger feels like when it isn't for attention. I read that line again and again. Didn't sound like arrogance anymore. Sounded like surrender. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the moonlight spill across the frost-tipped grass. In the distance, the hum of the highway sounded like an ocean, constant, restless, alive. I thought about her. Sophie. The woman who once walked into my kitchen wearing perfume too heavy and a smile too sharp. The one who had mocked my cooking as peasant food. The one who'd taken my son's love and held it like a weapon. And now, she was somewhere out there, stripped of her audience, sitting beside a dying fire. Strange how silence teaches more than humiliation ever could. The next morning, I drove to the market, the same one where she and I used to shop before things soured. I passed the bakery where she once complained the bread was too rustic. The florist, she said, smelled cheap. It all felt like walking through a museum of ghosts, memories suspended in air, untouched but still breathing. At the vegetable stand, an old woman greeted me with a smile. "Morning, Margaret. Haven't seen you in a while. How's that lovely daughter-in-law of yours?" I froze. The question wasn't cruel, it was innocent, casual. But it struck like a cold knife. "She's gone," I said quietly. "Oh," the woman whispered, eyes softening. "I'm sorry to hear that." And for a moment I wasn't sure if I was. A week later, Evan came over for dinner again. I didn't mention the letter. But he noticed the photograph tucked under a stack of recipes on the counter. He picked it up and frowned. "Where did this come from?" "It arrived in the mail," I said simply. He studied the handwriting, tracing the edge of the picture with his thumb. "This is hers." I nodded. "She's alive?" "Yes," I said. "But I think she's somewhere far away. Trying to find herself, maybe." He exhaled deeply, setting the photo down. I don't know how to feel about that. Then don't, I said softly. Just let it be. He looked at me for a long time. You forgive her, don't you? Question hung in the air, heavy but gentle. I stirred the soup on the stove before answering. Forgiveness isn't about saying what she did was okay. It's about deciding I won't carry it anymore. Evan leaned against the counter, silent. Then, quietly, I'm not there yet. That's all right, I said. You will be. That night after he left, I sat at the kitchen table again. Same place, same flickering light. The photograph was still there. I turned it over once more, rereading that line. I'm learning what hunger feels like when it isn't for attention. Made me think. Maybe pain really is the only language some people understand, not as punishment but as awakening. Maybe the gift I sent her wasn't the stew at all. Maybe it was the mirror it held up. And now, somewhere far away, she was finally looking at her reflection and seeing what she'd become. A few weeks later, another envelope arrived. Inside was a single pressed flower, white desert sage. No note this time. No words at all. I smiled faintly. It was enough. Meant she was alive. Meant she understood. That evening, I made her favorite dish, the one she used to mock, and ate it alone at the kitchen table. Not as revenge. Not as a symbol. Just as a reminder that peace doesn't come from victory. Comes from release. The house was quiet except for the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall. Each second felt softer than the last. I looked at the window and whispered to no one, "Eat well, Sophie." And for the first time I meant it. Sighed, the sparrows returned again, building their nests under the eaves. Life, as always, continued its quiet march forward. And I had finally stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. It was a Sunday morning in late summer when she came back. I was out in the garden trimming the last of the rosemary when I heard a car pull up. A quiet engine, expensive, not the kind that belonged on this old street. When I turned, she was standing at the gate. Sophie. For a second, my heart forgot how to beat. Her face was thinner, sharper. Her hair, once perfectly styled, now hung in loose strands. There was no makeup, no jewelry, no designer coat. Only a white shirt and jeans, both dusted with travel. And her eyes, they were different. No arrogance. No venom. Just something quiet. Something I hadn't seen before, humility. We stared at each other for a long moment, the air between us heavy with years that hadn't passed kindly. Finally, she spoke. "Can I come in?" I didn't answer. I just opened the gate. She stepped through slowly, her shoes crunching on the gravel, her gaze drifting over the garden she once called pathetic. It was blooming more than ever. She followed me inside without a word. The house smelled like stew, the same stew. She smiled faintly when she noticed. "You're still making it." "I never stopped," I said. We sat at the table. The same table where she'd once mocked my cooking. But now her hands trembled as she folded them. She looked smaller. Lighter somehow, like someone who'd been emptied out and rebuilt. "I owe you an apology," she began. I said nothing. I just listened. She took a slow breath. "I don't know what I was looking for when I married Evan. Maybe I wanted the kind of love that made me feel important. I didn't understand that it's not something you take. It's something you nurture." Her eyes filled with tears, the kind that don't beg for sympathy, only truth. "I mocked you because I was jealous. You had what I didn't, patience, warmth, a home that didn't need perfection to feel alive. I tried to destroy it because I didn't know how to belong in it." She paused, looking at the stew simmering on the stove. "When I found that letter, when I realized what you'd done, what you'd made me taste, it broke me. But it also woke me up. I went away for a while. I lived with people who had nothing. And for the first time, I had to earn kindness instead of demand it." Her voice shook slightly. That was the dish I couldn't swallow, the truth about myself. I watched her in silence, my hands clasped around my cup of tea, the steam curling upward between us. It wasn't anger I felt anymore. Just a deep, still understanding. "Why did you come back?" I finally asked. She hesitated. "To say thank you. And to say goodbye. I'm leaving the country. I found work in a community kitchen in Peru. They feed children who have nothing. It feels right." I looked at her for a long time. The girl who once sneered at soup now wanted to serve it. Life has a strange sense of irony. She reached into her bag and pulled something out, a small tin box. "I wanted to give you this," she said, sliding it across the table. Inside were old photos. Evan as a boy, me at the stove, Sophie smiling beside us at Christmas long ago. I hadn't seen these since she left. "I found them in Evan's old storage," she said softly. "I thought they belonged with you." For a moment I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight. "Does Evan know you're here?" I asked. She nodded. "He knows." We spoke. He forgave me in his own way. Then she smiled, not the fake kind I used to know. A real one. Gentle. Quiet. She stood, hesitating for just a moment before adding, "That stew, it was the first thing I ever finished cooking alone. I used your recipe." I met her eyes. "Did you learn to like it?" She smiled sadly. "I learned to understand it." And with that, she walked to the door. I followed her to the porch. The sun was low, gold spilling across the fence. She turned back one last time. "Thank you, Margaret," she said, "for teaching me in a way no one else ever could." I nodded. "Take care of yourself, Sophie." Then she got into the car and drove away, down the old road that led past the fields toward the edge of town. I watched until the dust settled and the silence returned. That night I made 2 bowls of stew. One for me. One for the empty chair across the table. And as I ate, I realized the bitterness was gone. The flavor hadn't changed, I had. The next morning I mailed a letter, no return address, just a note. The recipe isn't just about food. It's about learning to stay at the table, even when it hurts. I don't know if she'll ever receive it. But I like to think that somewhere in Peru, a woman ladles soup for hungry children and remembers the taste of forgiveness. Months later, Evan came by for dinner. We talked about work, about life, about nothing in particular. He was smiling again, not pretending this time. Before leaving, he hugged me longer than usual. "She wrote to me," he said quietly. "She's doing well." I smiled. "Good. A letter." After he left, I looked out at the garden, at the rosemary, the sage, the thyme. They'd grown wild again. And in that quiet, I finally understood something. Revenge isn't served cold. It's served warm, slowly, patiently, until it turns into something else entirely. A lesson. A release. A story you can live with. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the night. I washed the dishes, turned off the lights, and whispered one last line to the darkness. "Bon appetit." And that was the end.